Now, there is no shortage of buzz right now on the Plains. There's a lot of buzz about a specific quarterback who's committed to another school. So to break it all down from Auburn, live, the best in the business, Jeffrey Lee. Jeffrey, let's just get right to it, man. Duce Knight, he's going to be on campus again. What's the latest development there with the Notre Dame commit right now and as it stands with Auburn?
Yeah, Steve Wiltfong reported Monday night that Duce is coming back with his mom, his brothers, his sisters, and I really think that's really good writing on the wall for Auburn. His whole family was just in Auburn not 3 weeks ago for during Big Cat Weekend. Duce wasn't there for the activities and stuff, but he arrived on campus later that day. His parents were already there. JD, I'm going to be honest with you, that to me said a lot, and then to have him already openly confirming to reporters that he's coming back for the season opener. If you didn't like Auburn's chances before now, you really should now.
And I think the question for a lot of folks is like, okay, he's been committed to Notre Dame for a while. Ole Miss was a school that kind of got lumped in with him for a while because he's, in the state of Mississippi. Why now for Auburn? Why is all of this sort of just, coming to the surface at this point in time?
Well, I think it goes back to the quarterbacks they've recruited in the past. They were really heavy on Husan Longstreet. They really pushed hard for him to get him in the class back in the spring. He ultimately chose A&M. And then it seemed like their focus turned to Juju Lewis and flipping him from USC. And, they were on the Juju Lewis train there for a long time. And I feel like Hugh Freeze and Ken Austin and Derek Nix, got to the point where, either you're going to or you're not, because we really need to make a move here at quarterback. We really want to have this position locked down going into the season. And I think the Juju Lewis recruitment with Auburn came to a head. And I feel like Auburn decided to move on. And who did they move on to? Well, they had KJ Lacey, they had Duce Knight, and I really think on their board, overall fit, the highest ceiling between those two was Duce Knight. And for Auburn recruiting fans, they know that Duce Knight was one of the first quarterbacks we mentioned, back in the last summer, maybe, a guy to keep an eye on. He visited Auburn. He was really good friends with Alvin Henderson. We had heard some buzz that those two wanted to play in college together. So early on, he was one of the guys we were, highly focused on in its coverage. And then, of course, he ended up committing to Notre Dame, September, almost a year ago. So when they pivoted back to Duce Knight, it was full steam ahead. The SEC pitch there to him, the proximity to home was there for him, familiarity with the recruits, playing with guys that he has become friends with. And I really think Auburn just, put its claws in him and is not going to let him go until he tells them no. And that's obviously something that has not happened.
Yeah, it's a good strategy. If you're recruiting a quarterback, make them tell you no. It's a good way to go about doing things. And now, whenever you land a quarterback, and just in recruiting in general, it seems to be a pretty big factor when it comes to momentum and landing other recruits. Is there anyone that you're like, hey, if they do flip Duce Knight, keep an eye on this guy or that guy to be swept up in the ripple effect?
Absolutely, especially at quarterback, and a prominent guy like Duce Knight just kind of increases all those odds. But I think the one guy that we're all going to be watching is Caleb Cunningham, the 5-star wide receiver from Mississippi, who visited Auburn, left with Auburn #1, and then 2 weeks later visited Alabama and subsequently committed to Alabama. There's really good relationships there with Caleb Cunningham, with Derek Nix, with Hugh Freeze, with Marcus Davis. And I really feel like even without Duce Knight, I think Auburn still has a chance with Caleb Cunningham, but certainly not as much. You get Duce Knight in the fold heading into the season, you get him to come back and get Caleb Cunningham on campus. I think Auburn could at least make Alabama worry a little bit before signing day.
Jeffrey, outside of Duce Knight, who else is someone that you would peg as maybe a top priority for Auburn? I know you mentioned Caleb Cunningham already, but anybody else outside of those guys that maybe is on the radar for the folks over at Auburn?
Yeah, absolutely. Before the season starts, Auburn is wanting to get this class as full as possible before the season. They know last year was all about recruiting. This year is all about winning during the season. So they want to have as much recruiting done as possible before next week, before the season opener. So they would like to get a quarterback in the class. They'd like to get, Andrew Babalola, the 5-star offensive tackle, Tyler Lockhart, the 4-star linebacker from Mississippi. So there's several guys. Usman Croma, 4-star running back from South Georgia. A lot of guys. Malachi Goodman. There's about 5 or 6 guys that we're really keeping an eye on right now, heading into this last week before Auburn kicks off its season. A lot of these guys have announced that they would like to have decisions made before then or shortly thereafter. So all of those guys, these top targets on Auburn's board. Auburn's got 22 commitments right now, and if they were to get half of the guys that I just mentioned, they're up to 25, 26. And now you're being selective. Now you're really pushing for Naeem Alford and the Caleb Cunninghams, and you're really being able to and having the time to invest in them, and then really just concentrating on keeping everyone else in the fold.
It's an exciting time on the Plains. Jeffrey Lee, thanks for stopping by the Inside Scoop.
Absolutely, JD. Thanks for having me.
Well, you've made it to the end of today's video, but there's hundreds more videos on the On3 Recruits channel for you to check out. And also, while you're here, hit subscribe.